Okay, got it. I think with that, we'll begin. Oh, Chris, now you got to make me co-host.
Yep, you got it.
Okay, happy Tuesday evening, everyone. Welcome to September board meeting. I want to thank everyone for a really solid set of committee meetings last week that have now set us up to do some good work and thinking tonight. So we'll start out with a mission moment that I'm borrowing from something I used with SLC last week and with the ECPC last week. And that was to highlight some events that we did back in August, late August. And so as y'all know, our mission is to empower our kids so they may lead fulfilling lives. And we're much stronger at that when we do so in working in partnership with our families. As such, this year and each and every year, but particularly this year formally, we're looking to increase family engagement. And we're doing that in a few ways over the course of the year, which I've talked about in prior meetings and presenting our key priorities for the year. But I'm pleased to report that we've done a number of things already this year, including a rather significant event back in late August with a family orientation and festival. And so imagine both sides coming together, which is not something we've done before. We were all at the middle school, staff sporting very stylish orange t-shirts, as you can see in the photos here. And all of our kids and families there, there being informational tables set up that feature all aspects of our school, in particular aspects of school that might not get some of the attention that it deserves. Our two social workers at the middle school, Atilia and Clarissa, are featured here in the picture on the left. And so it's good to have just early discussions and informing families about all that we offer as a school. And so different tables involving academic counseling, college and career readiness, some new programs, including debate, athletics, some of our enrichment programs, everything out there so that families could see it. We also had some games. We had music, some contests, we had food, and then we had an orientation also going on alongside the festival where Melissa and Grace and Andrea and Casey were leading the way and giving our families a sense of like what it means to sort of be collectively committed to the good work in the coming year. And so part of that was just in sharing our commitments as a staff, what we aspire for our students to bring to our school each and every day, as well as families. And so there was a bit of a ritual in kind of doing that, but it was meant to, right from the start, convey like, hey, this is important for us all to work together, and here's how we do those things such that kids benefit in the best possible way as we serve families and students to school. So pleased there. I think it does reap dividends over the course of the year. A lot of positive feedback coming from both staff and from families and students even. So a good night overall. And so we're looking to piggyback off of that this coming week. I'll say a bit more about that momentarily, but this is certainly a big event for us and a big priority for us in the coming year. And again, I think our mission is stronger when working alongside our families. So that is the mission moment for tonight. And so I want to give a special thank you. One person who was in the mix was Trudy Sandy, and so she came by and she was able to talk it up. She has a nephew, I think, going to our school now in the 6th grade, and so she was able to engage with our 6th grade teachers. She got to chat with Andrea quite a bit. I had never met before, so I was pleased to introduce them. And so it was nice to have her there, and it gave me some ideas, which we'll also talk about tonight. And so thank you, Trudy, and I'll thank her again when she gets on.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Josh. You want to jump right into the school report?
I certainly will. Yeah, let me unshare because I don't know of any other way of doing this, and then share again once I've opened that up. Don't want that one. I want this one. All right, so you all have the leader report for this month in your inbox, and you now have it in front of you. And so I guess I'm going to make this a bit smaller. And so I guess I would just say, as I did in the intro, that like, so school's begun. We're about, I guess, maybe close to 10 days in. And I think in a number of ways, we're off to a really strong start. Things feel, as I said here, relatively smooth, focused and positive at both sites. There are so many fewer variables this year that we're kind of thinking through that were very unfamiliar to us last year and the year before that. It feels a lot more like school as we remember it. And I think as a result, we're able to focus on more squarely on kind of like teaching and learning and the culture that reinforces it at both sites. As I said here, we've got strong enrollment in our 6th grade this year. That feels really great going into the year. We've got strong seasoned leadership at both sites. I think that shows just in the way each school presents itself. And so we're off to a good start. It feels good. I think with that, I just named that there are challenges like in any year. And I think like many other schools, we're still facing some challenges around staffing openings and vacancies. And so I'm going to say a bit more about that in a moment. I think the headline are we're stretched, but we're doing okay in the short term. And we're looking to kind of like fill out our team pretty aggressively each day. So that's where things stand. I mentioned that in our SLC call a bit during the AFC call, but that's where I see things 10 days in. Melissa, would you add anything? Chris, would you add anything?
Oh, I am unmuted. No, I think this captures the heart of it. Like folks feel that this year feels stronger. I think classrooms feel stronger. School culture feels stronger. There are still, it's still pretty tiring. Staffing is tough. Negotiating what should look different now in our current moment is challenging. We've had, some turnover that impacts the realities of a school. And we know it's a really important year. So those are all true, but it does still feel folks are happier.
Good stuff. And Chris, I'll have you share out maybe enrollment kind of updates momentarily. And so I guess with that, we'll move on. I'll say a bit more about kind of staffing, where things stand in detail. But first, let me kind of mention a few headlines that I think are worth providing to the full board. So you see what I shared out to the SLC on Thursday. And I think the things I'd point out with regard to family engagement, I mentioned the event we did back in August. We're now doubling up on that with an open school night or back to school night in which our families get to sort of interact with teachers and learn more about classes their kids are taking. And so that's a feature. We're doing an award ceremony as a way to kind of build in some joy and some academic pride right from the start. So our new students get to see that and get a taste of it. So that'll be happening. And then we're also going to be sharing out at the middle school our STAR baseline results to kids and families. We have not done that before. So academically, families will have a sense right from the bat of where kids kind of are in reading and math in grades 6 through 8. That feels right. And then we'll give them a bit of a tutorial on kind of how to interpret the results that they receive from us in the form of a one-pager that STAR provides. So those things feel right in terms of what we're doing this year, which is, I think, building on what we've done in prior years. So I'm happy about that. With regard to state exams, we talked about state exams quite a bit last month. Updates are state results have still yet not been released, which is sort of a question mark. It seems sort of odd in comparison to what they've done in the past. But I'd say anecdotally, Jake was able to kind of pass on some interesting data, as have others, with regard to kind of how schools have fared. And I think the headline here is that schools had a hard time. And I think the scores show a significant dip in both reading, ELA, and math across the board at the elementary and middle school level. And I think what I'm seeing is perhaps the dip that we took in math, and then the slight increase that we saw in ELA that I reported out on last month, relatively stronger than what the average school experienced with regard to change from 2 years ago, the last time the test, or 3 years ago, the last time the test was given pre-COVID, and how schools fared this past spring. So that is actually good information that we have at this time, and we're eager to get more comparison data, hopefully this month. Are there any questions there with that, or any other insights, any other sort of things that folks have heard around state results or thoughts from the last now?
I think based on the data Jake sent, I think I saw two stories there, right? First is there was the dip. The second one is that whatever sample that was had better scores than we did, right? So I think that's the second part of the equation that we need to discuss and sort of grapple with and decide, how much of an objective it is to have that not be the case in future periods.
So I think just to sort of add to that. So what I hear you saying is there was a dip across the board, but the relative dip that we experienced was less than what we're seeing from other schools. That's a good thing, although we prefer not to see any dips. So that's one. And then second, the sampling of schools provided were schools that also had elementary schools, all of them. So they feed into each other. And so I think that's also worth acknowledging within this. And I think that's a good thing because that's what we're aiming for with our school and applying for an expansion downward. So I think that sort of is the full story at this point in time, with still a lot of information missing.
Right, but do we really think that the only difference is these guys have feeder schools and we don't?
Some people would say yes.
Okay.
I might not say yes. I'd say it's a significant factor, and a really significant factor, but some folks would say, yeah, straight up, that's what you got to do.
Okay.
So I think in addition to that, I would just add that just to go back to extracurriculars, I've mentioned fall athletics are now in season. And I think that the thing that's great is we have a third of our kids at the middle school travel sports. So they're busy and active and looking to show team pride after school at the middle school. I don't have data on the high school yet, but I just think that's a good thing for kids and rounding out their day and the educational experience. So some good things to report there. Let's move on to staffing. And so staffing is such that, I'm saying currently we have 5 vacancies. There's a little bit of variation depending on how we internally cover, the duration of that coverage, whether we perhaps have a person pivot into a different role based on what we feel is best for kids. And so there's a little bit of variation here, but I think some of the key vacancies that we have right now are listed in the third bullet. At the middle school, we have a very hard opening with a history and learning specialist, an ENL teacher, and a reading interventionist. We are covering each of those internally, and I think rather well. We've got some seasoned folks doing that, but as a result, they're stretched thin and perhaps not able to do their full plate of their work as well as if we were fully staffed. Similar story at the high school, physical education teacher, we're covering that internally at this point in time, and history and learning specialist, among a perhaps other number of openings if we find the right candidate and feel like that's best for school. So that's where things stand currently with regard to openings. And so, I think I've said this before, we talked about this last month, but we did have 3, I want to remember this for moving forward. We had 3 vacancies happen in August, 2 at the high school, 1 at the middle school, and those are especially hard to rebound from. And so I'm planting that in my head to remember that going into next year and how we sort of staff and hire and do so aggressively. I talked about some of the actions last month that we're taking. They're still in play. And so I think in addition to being crafty and smart and creative with how we use team, we've been pretty aggressive in trying to sort of hire folks. It has been quieter the last week or so. Part of that is because we've been interviewing and making decisions about people who we've interviewed. And so perhaps we've slowed down on inviting new people in just because we're also doing school each and every day. But things have slowed down a little bit over the past week. And so I don't know if that's a trend or just a blip, but we'll continue to do the outreach. And so we're using Indeed and paying for that, and using LinkedIn and paying for that in addition to internal referrals. So that's the story staffing wise. Any insights or questions in follow-up form coming from the board about the status of openings and hiring at our school at this point in time? All right, cool. I'm going to jump into just the last bit, which are a series of miscellaneous updates that I think are worthy of note. Some good ones here. So with regard to board representation, I mentioned Trudy coming to this event, and I mentioned earlier this summer Lenny coming to graduation, and it was just really cool to have we don't have to have a full team of busy board members at our school all the time for every event, but it was nice to have some representation and maybe even one or two folks where I was able to sort of like introduce you all to various stakeholders of our school, families, staff, students themselves. It just felt good. And so I'd like to take that idea, take that experience and just magnify it and do more of that over the coming year. So there are a series of events that I've identified this fall and winter that I'd like to bring to this board and just ask folks to say, hey, look, if you could take part in this event, we'd love to have you and show you a great time. You'd have fun, you'd leave inspired. And so what I wanted to said in this note that I bring you those events tonight. I'm not ready to do so yet. Got a couple of questions I want to figure out beforehand, but I'll be circling back to you very likely via email about like, hey, who could take part in such an experience and be a lot of fun. And I'll look to persuade folks based on where I think you might have the most amount of fun. So I think that's one kind of like update, early preview of what's to come. Second bullet on the health and safety front, we have had just 2 cases thus far, both at the middle school. And I think our protocols, which are new and borrowed from the DOE, have worked sufficiently. And I spoke with Casey about that this morning. Chris, you also played a hand in these cases and how we support families and make sure that safety is preserved. But overall, these new protocols seem to be effective in creating safety, a sense of calmness, and allowing for school to resume. Any experiences there coming from the parents on the call thus far? My youngest son wasn't sent home, but he had about half his kids in class at PS11 this past week on Friday because of a couple of cases and kids staying home. So it's still there, but it's different. It feels very different. All right.
I've noticed that in my kids' pictures that get sent home, mine are the only ones in masks by choice, their choice. Yeah. It looks very different than last year's images of the start of school.
It is wild. Simon, who's 4, had a cough and decided it was best for him to wear a mask to pre-K yesterday. So he wore one all day. We didn't experience this growing up. It's wild. All right, so expanded services. We're going to talk about transportation and all good things, enrollment, and what it means on the services front later on during the approval front. So I won't say anything there. And let's see. I want you to disregard the next to last bullet. I had information that was not accurate. So we are making some adjustments to our renewal application per Paula Orlando's requests and recommendations. And that's specifically with regard to key design elements. But as of right now, there's no need to bring that to a vote, and it's not clear that they're material or anything like that. So I think this note here can be disregarded. What we are bringing you tonight is that we do need to have approval for our application to present and request approval for a change in our organizational chart if we get approval to downward expand. So very, very kind of iffy with regard to what it is, but it's something that Paula said we should put forward. So that'll be on the approval list tonight in about a half hour or so. And then visitations right now, every year, it's been great to host you all to our school sites. We'll continue with that this year. I just want to get a sense of when the renewal visit will be happening and structure things, schedule things in accordance with that. So I'm waiting for those dates. We're going to talk a bit more about that visit and our preparation for that within the strategic planning portion of tonight's agenda, which might be right now, but that's where we are at this point in time. And so that's the quick update on the update of the school year report for this month. Any other questions on things perhaps I didn't talk about, or insights or ideas that are worth bringing to the full board now? Okay, back to you, Jim.
Okay, yeah, let's jump right into the dashboard.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to share my screen a third time, and then I'm going to hand the mic to Chris, who's going to talk through a bit about where we are enrollment-wise, about 10 days in. Let's see. And as we do so, I'll just say that our dashboard, this is really the only dashboard table worth digging into as a full board tonight. Everything else is still really early in configuration, and we're making some updates too. Here's Trudy, excellent, to our dashboard. So they're even better and clearer and more informative to the work we do. So with that, I'll share. I'll say hi, Trudy.
Hi.
Hey, I shouted you out again for attending the festival in late August. Thank you again for that. It was really great to have you there.
You got it. No problem.
All right, Chris, to you.
Absolutely. So about 20 days into school. So we've got 545 students enrolled
Does it feel like
across
20 days, Chris? We're only 10 days in.
Feel like it. We've got 545 students enrolled across both sites. We've got 268 middle schoolers, 277 high schoolers. Added a new column so you can see where we were compared to September 2021. So we've got 17 more sixth graders than we had this time last year, 24 more seventh graders. We have 18 less eighth graders. We have 14 less ninth graders, 5 less 10th graders, 15 more 11th graders, and 3 less 12th graders. So overall, we've got 23 more students at our middle school site than we did this time last year. We have 7 less high school students than we did this time last year. But I do have a few new high school students starting tomorrow, and there are a few high school students who haven't returned to school yet, who are working closely with our social workers to get those students back in school to hopefully we'll be net to where we were this time last year at our high school site.
Thanks, Chris. I think if I'm in your shoes, I might just look at the last column here, which is the total. So you see target enrollment is about 549. Budget enrollment is 519. ATS enrollment, that's just what's in our system as we clean up things and other schools clean up things and figure out where kids are going, is 584, which is a big number, versus the good work that Chris has done alongside our social work team, our academic counseling team, our ops team, and figuring out which of our students are truly coming to our school versus who are not. And so there's a big gap between that 545 and 584. So that takes some time to again clarify. And I would say in terms of sixth grade, this is a really, really nice cohort size-wise. It allows for us to offer as much programming as we possibly can to as many students as possible. So that is a huge win this year. And I think as Chris said in the ninth grade, perhaps on the other side of things, one thing that I think we're not satisfied with is we had fewer students enroll in our ninth grade from our eighth grade at Unity than we've had perhaps ever. And so less than a majority of our kids in our ninth grade came from our middle school. There were some changes over the course of the summer in plans. We've got to do a better job of counseling kids and providing the right information to kids early on. And so I want to report, there's a bit more sort of groundwork I'd like for us to do in analyzing kind of where we are and which kids ended up at our high school and which kids did not, to then do some smart things with regard to first and foremost, ensuring that families have all information at hand and that they make the best decisions possible for their kids educationally and otherwise. And then from there, making sure they know that all that we offer at the high school, and that it might be relatively stronger than what other options they're looking at. So that to me is kind of where we are with regard to where there are some highlights here and where we've got some work to do. I think with that, because this is the only table we're going to dig into today, dashboard wise, are there questions, insights here that you want to look into? There were some smart comments on Friday coming from Mario and Jeanette during the AFC call. I don't know if Jeanette or Martin, you want to name those again, but.
Well, I mean, I think just do it quickly, right? I think it's encouraging that we have more kids in sixth grade, seventh grade. I think what we were discussing was that the decrease in eighth was due to that small cohort that's making its way through.
Yep.
And then Chris and Josh were discussing the decrease in ninth, which I think resulted from fewer kids than we expected going from the middle school to the high school. And we all agreed to try to figure out why that was and what we could do so that we have a better retention rate across sites going forward. But overall, it's it's a positive picture compared to what we've dealt with in prior years.
Yeah. Great. So I think with that, that's the update on enrollment and all things dashboard for this evening. Back to you, Jim.
Great. Okay. Strategic planning.
All right. I feel like, Jim, I'm on the football field and you're up in the rafters and kind of calling the game here. Back to you, Jim.
I had a little 4-year-old meltdown. I won't show you, but I've got a 4-year-old on my lap. She,
Oh gosh.
yeah. So it was one of those. But I'm on.
All right. Let's see. So I'm going to share my screen a fourth time. All right, and I will. We were talking about classes to open up tonight's meetings. We were waiting to engage, and so I'll apologize for the font size here. Melissa, you can make fun of me later on, or now, whatever you choose. So
You took care of it.
So for the strategic planning portion of tonight's meeting, I want to talk a bit about our renewal visit planning and prep, and the senior leadership team at both sites today convened to talk a bit about this and strategize. So I'm kind of reporting out to you what we discussed today, perhaps a little more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what the renewal visit is, how it kind of applies to our renewal application, and then the purpose of why we're doing this tonight, and then some of the nuts and bolts. So I think, as you all know, we're moving in. We are in year 10 of the school. We've applied for a full renewal. We've submitted our application. We have submitted some revisions. We are preparing to submit benchmark 1. I should talk about that now. I meant to say that earlier during the school leader report. I'll do that within this. And so I think within that process, one additional component is a visit from representatives of the state education department, our liaison. Usually they bring in a consultant or two, and they spend 2 days at our school. They did that 5 years ago, and some of you took part in that. And there was a focus group session like the one you took part in 2 years ago, except it was all in person. So from there on out, based on the application, based on the visit, based on data, based on other things, they then put forward a recommendation to the Board of Regents about the status of a renewal. And sometimes we recommend a 5-year renewal, which is what we got the last time around, or a 3-year renewal, which is what schools often get, or perhaps a 1-year renewal if there's some concerns, or none if there's some real concerns. So that's generally the flow of things and how things go. What I want to do tonight is focus on the renewal visit, and I want to orient you all to like the planning we're doing internally and preparing for that. I think that'll then kind of allow for you to think about the way in which the board and we prepare for the focus group session part of that visit. And then I love your input for sharpening our preparation and planning here. So
you may have discussed this in committee, but
yep.
Or this may come up, but could you give like a 2-second overview of sort of what happened since we submitted?
Yeah, so since we've submitted, there's been a whole lot of like back and forth on little things with regard to our renewal application, on just like additional information with regard to mainly the revision requests. And so I mentioned the key design elements earlier, and so there was a little more information wanted there. There is now some information wanted on the organizational chart and kind of like the framing of how that looks in the event of an expansion downward, and perhaps a few other kind of questions here and there. Michelle has done a really nice job of kind of fielding that alongside me, and so we've kind of been spearheading most of that effort, but all is going smooth. I think I'm impressed with just the level of detail that Paula is putting forth in our dialogue, and like just in her kind of like quickly onboarding to like who we are as a school. So it's been good. And so I think alongside that kind of like back and forth work since the application, we've got this renewal visit happening sometime this fall. And so we haven't, a date has not been identified for that, but I imagine it being perhaps sometime in late October, November, maybe December. I've been surprised before and it's happened in the spring, so it's hard to say, but based on Paula's latest guidance, it would happen very likely before January. And so this visit is one component of our full kind of like process for renewal. It's an important one. I think we're well positioned right now, as I've said before, for a full 5-year renewal. And the observations that NYSD gathers and the evidence they gather, I think, will inform the recommendation to the Board of Regents. And so I think this is a good opportunity for us to show our best stuff. The visit will involve observations of classes and of the general school building and flow of the building. It will involve meetings with leaders. It will involve focus group sessions, very likely with the board and with perhaps families, with students. That's what I've seen in the past. And so it's a fairly comprehensive visit. I think the goal for us is just to show off our best stuff, particularly with regard to classroom observations. And I think that matters a great deal. A lot of these folks who come from state are former educators and want to see kids engaged and joyful and focused and learning new things. And so I'm excited to kind of have them take part in that. So I think for us, we want to be a model school for NYSD, in addition to kind of being a model school that we sort of see possible for us and for our kids and families. And so for us, I think we're well positioned right now with regard to the communication and the strong showing we put forth for the renewal application with Michelle's correspondence with SED to sort of like hit the ground running and present the school really well. That's the framing. Mario, you had a good question kind of immersed sort of in this framing. Are there other questions before I move on to kind of like the next steps, the things we're going to take part in preparation for the visit?
Josh,
Okay.
one just administrative thing. Am I okay to sign that document that they sent around?
I think so. I know it's
Okay.
due the 30th, and so I kind of like it's on my radar to write to you
Okay, good.
tomorrow after I give it a surely look to say, is this surely ready to go? But yeah, I appreciate
Yeah.
that. Yep, I'll be
Okay,
in touch
great.
tomorrow.
All right, thanks.
So again, a smaller font from us. So next steps here. Right now, the focus is on, and it's shifted over the past week or so as we now prepare, getting documentation on our policies, our systems, our data, our protocols together. Like, how do we do what we do in the school? Because those are things that will be reviewed by this visiting team, and they want to see these things in action. So that's sort of like one step going on right now. Also, just beginning to kind of prep stakeholders for meetings and focus group sessions. And so I want to talk a bit about what that might look like for us tonight. This will begin in October. And I think what might make sense for the board is to have perhaps a mock session. We could have an outsider sort of conduct that. Simeon Stoltzberg, who helped us with our application review, that would be a good candidate for kind of running such a 45-minute session. And so if folks on this call think that that's a good idea, we could set something up perhaps as a part of the next meeting. I don't know if folks want to respond to that now or perhaps have some time to think about it, but I think that I've seen other schools do that, and it definitely bodes well for a strong showing.
I mean, Josh, I think it makes sense to do something like this because given that we do this once every 5 years and that, not everybody's done it before, and those of us who've done it before don't remember. Yeah. It's probably a good idea to have some kind of a briefing. I don't know if you want to do a mock or something else, but we should walk in there knowing what might happen.
Yeah. I recall when we had the visit 2 years ago that we did a bit of a session where I gave you like 4 or 5 pages worth of stuff. I think during that session, there was a bit of like, man, this is a lot of material. And I think we talked it over, and I think it was helpful. And then I remember Jake specifically saying, yeah, that session was helpful in sort of driving our discussion and what we talked about with the liaison to SED. So we could take a similar approach this time around.
Okay.
So in terms of preparing for observations, and this is where we spent more of our time today with the SSLT, the senior school leadership team, in discussion. And so, right now we're doing the work that we we want to do regardless of what year it is and whether it's year 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. And that's just like being in classes and really promoting strong teaching and learning experiences for kids. We've got some focus areas for the fall, which is kind of like getting off to a strong start. And I think they're fairly typical of what you'd see in schools with specific focus areas in the fall. We discussed those with the SLC last Thursday. I'm not going to bring those fully to the board tonight. I think that might be too detailed, but we're focused on those things. And so when we're in classes, and I'm thinking of school leaders, principals, coaches, deans, these are the things that we're sort of looking to kind of actively coach into in collaboration with our teaching team. So like that's happening. We're also going to do some simulated observations based on kind of what SED does as a part of their visit when visiting classes. And what's nice is there's a lot of overlap between the sort of tools and rubrics that SED uses and what we use. So it's not like we're doing and preparing for something different that isn't going to benefit kids anyway. So I've provided some links here, and I can share these. These are in the SLC agenda, but I've got a rubric by SED. This is what they use when they kind of look at classes and kind of make a judgment call on like, hey, what's going on in this class is really powerful for kids, to what extent? And then we've got kind of our rubric that we use internally, where again, there's a lot of overlap with our stuff and what SED uses. And then we've got kind of a whole school walkthrough form that we're using, which just gives you a sense of like, hey, in the cafeteria, what's going on? Is this really good for kids? And to what degree? What's going on in the halls? To what degree? So I think we're going to be using kind of a combination of these 3 resources to simulate some observations over the next few weeks so that we're comfy with how we present our school. And that our team is kind of comfy with what goes down. And then we've got some kind of like general sense of in the eyes of SED based on what they look at, what would they see, and what do we aspire for them to see. So that's process-wise how we're doing things around observations and gearing up for that. And then we've created kind of a timeline for what that might look like. And so over the course of the next week, we'll be doing kind of 1.0 walkthrough and just piloting what this looks like. And we'll be doing these roughly on a weekly basis. In mid-October, we're going to do perhaps something which is a bit more formal, and we'll bring in some quasi-outsiders. Michelle's going to come in, Simeon will likely be in, and maybe we'll pull in someone else to do the same kind of walkthrough and give us a sense of what an outside eye might see. And we feel by doing these things, we're better equipped to put forward a strong showing. So that's the process over the coming month. We'll reassess in mid to late October on how things are going. By that time, we should have a date for when the renewal visit is happening, and we'll go from there. So that's the planning as of now. Would love folks' feedback, input, recommendations on how to perhaps sharpen this, or pose out some questions that might make us think about this even more deeply. Or stamp the parts that like you think are strong and that we should especially look to focus on.
I mean, I think it's probably fairly obvious, but I just want to make sure we have enough to properly discuss the proposed expansion. So just make sure that that's a good part of the focus.
Good stuff. Good stuff, Ryan. Other considerations? Something else which comes to mind specifically for school leadership and the board would be, and I think this was mentioned perhaps last month by someone on the board, but in looking at that renewal visit, even though it happened in the spring of 2021, I think, and that's a long way off, there was some stuff there that we should be prepared to sort of say, hey, look, that feedback was valuable and relevant, and here's what we're doing or what we've done to address it. That would also kind of bode well for a strong showing.
Is someone going to put together sort of a script for us to memorize, for lack of a better? Okay. Yeah. Especially like Marion said on the expansion down, I can imagine that I'm asking us about why our needs not being filled right now with the current schools that are servicing these kids. I have no idea even what those schools look like and what the need is, all that sort of stuff. So we could all be on the same page.
Yep.
When they're asking questions.
Yep, agreed. No, that's good stuff. And that is not a part of the original kind of set of resources that we looked at 2 years ago in prep for the midterm visit, because it wasn't official. It wasn't something that we were engaging in. So that's helpful too. All right. So I think with that here, so this is what is kind of going on with regard to renewal visit planning. I now want to double back to benchmark 1. As you all know, we've submitted our renewal application and kind of addressed all benchmarks 1 through 10, 1 through 11, or 2 through 10 or 11, whatever the last benchmark is. But we haven't addressed benchmark 1 yet. And so we have through the beginning of October to submit that second piece, now that we have some extent of like how we did testing wise. Again, we don't have comparison data, but we can still make an attempt in putting forth a compelling case of like where we are, what we've done, what we'll continue to do with regard to proficiency academically and growth academically. So that supplement is due October 3rd. Michelle and I are kind of beginning to work away on that now. And we've got our draft from 5 years ago, and we're looking to kind of continue to use that and essentially make it better and stronger with the more updated data we have, obviously. And we've got more data because we've got high school now in the mix too, fully, along with graduation. So that's happening right now. There isn't, in speaking with Michelle this morning, there isn't a need for the board to formally approve the submission of benchmark 1, as we know now. We'll confirm that, but there's been no mention of that thus far. But it makes sense to get this out to you all so you can kind of see it before we then submit it. And so it's due on the 3rd of October. We'd like to get you a first draft or a draft by Wednesday, which is, I believe, the 28th, I want to say.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll give you about 48 hours to look it over, provide comments. It'll be in fairly good form. During that time, Simeon will also be looking at it, and then we would submit it that following Monday after looking at any amendments folks sort of want to recommend and put forward. So that's where things stand with regard to all things renewal and this benchmark 1 supplement. Are there questions there, or any recommendations on an adjustment to the timeline? I know that's a little tight. I wish it was not. But I think if the board is 48 hours and has advance notice, that should be sufficient to kind of give things a look over. It's not the full application. It's probably a few pages versus what you had the first time around, with a lot of tables. So again, that'll come out to you on the morning of the 28th, and we'd like to then get it back on the morning of Friday, which would be, I guess, the 30th. All right, I think with that, we are at the end of the strategic planning portion of tonight's meeting. Jim, back to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's just jump right into AFC then.
Okay. If Alex is here, Chris, you've got co-host privileges. I've been sharing my screen.
She'll be on in just a moment. She's watching the live stream.
Okay, got it. Shannon Murray, you want to provide me? We had the call on Friday. Do you want to provide any headlines as we wait for Alex to jump in?
Yeah, I think the headlines were that there isn't much to report yet, right?
Yeah, we're a month into school, and so we
Right.
closed out. We closed out the financials from last year, and things ended up where we thought they would. So Alex can say a bit more about that momentarily, and then we're only a month in. So
And I mean, I think we talked about two things. We talked about the fact that the audit was in process, and we just haven't had the meeting yet. And then we talked about whether or not we should keep the cash to a higher level by transferring money from the Friends of organization. I think, Josh, you did a little bit of digging on the report we'd received, the midterm or whatever it's called, and concluded that we probably should try to stay above 60, right?
And I think we're trying to have the auditor meeting the next AFC meeting, but maybe we'll let the full board know when that is in case others want to join.
Yep. Hey, Alex.
Hey, how are you?
Well, how are you tonight?
I'm very well, thank you.
All right. So you ready for about 2 or 3 minutes of updates, starting with last year stuff? And
Don't
then
even think I need that.
Okay. Right. So you have, I'm sure you may have screen. You do.
Yeah, I'm just going to kill my video so we don't have any interference. So this is a brief update. This is both the June 30th financial report, and that's also the July financial report. I won't spend a ton of time because this information will come out in our audited financial statements. I have just received those from our auditor. I want to do my preliminary review, make sure everything is consistent with what I believe it should be, and then it'll go off to the committee and then the full board. So just a few highlights here. As we wrapped up the year, we ended with a total margin of about 8%, and that was before we took out all of the grant support. Removing the grant support, we were at about 1.5%, which is slightly under the 2 to 3% that we aimed for, but consistent with the variance in enrollment that we were tracking throughout the year. We did notice that cash dipped a little bit at the end of the year. That has since replenished. We did submit for reimbursement from a number of the federal grants that we received that we had fronted throughout the year, got the money in August. But I can confirm, what we're reporting here in net income, that is going to be the final net income in the audited financial statements. So there aren't going to be any other changes to this. If you reviewed it or have any questions about it, this is the final information.
If we could stay here for a moment,
Yeah.
Alex, in case you're ready to move. So I think that the thing that Marion and Jeanette alluded to is kind of what's in red there for days of cash on hand. If we followed this month by month, and there's typically a variation every other month where it might be below 50 on a given month and then perhaps above 60 or 70 in a given month. That's been the trend the last couple of years. You'll see the goal, the SD benchmark goal, listed next to days on cash being 90 days. And we have wrestled with this for years about like, what's this number? Is this the right number? Is this the benchmark? I'm going back to like, probably our first or second year even thinking about this. And what was helpful this weekend, so I think the question was, should we be increasing the cash on hand through a transfer from FOMB so that things look really healthy financially for us? And I did a little bit of research on kind of what the benchmark seems to be and whether having under 90 days or having under some number is a detriment. And in looking at some of the reporting that SD has done on our school and does for all other schools, the benchmark seems to be closer to 60 days of cash on hand. And so I've looked at some of the dashboards that they have used in looking at our financials. And so I think 60 seems to be the number, not 90, not 45. And so I think if we just sort of pin our cash on hand goals to that, things are authentically healthy. And so I think one of the questions we had on Friday, which seems to now be we should do this based on that research, is that we should look to transfer and maintain cash on hand at close to 60 days when there's a need to transfer. Jeanette Moran, that's my sense. Let me know if you disagree or you want to clarify something I've said.
I don't disagree. I think we need to do whatever puts us in the right position, but what I'd like to see is sort of a little graph over, like, call it 12 months, 24 months, whatever is most informative of seeing where we've actually been, right? And Alex can figure out how best to present it, but I can't, and sort of seeing a trend line, because if it dips for 3 days and then we immediately get the per pupil, I may want to address that differently than if we're half the time at 45 and half the time at 90. So just kind of curious about whether or not basically we need to pad the amount of cash by putting, one-time transfer that fixes what might be the shortfall, or whether we sort of do temporary transfers every couple months. Like I'd like to better understand how the number varies.
So I think that's sort of a next step for us, but I think the move would be to begin making changes in that direction over the next couple of months.
On the draft financials, have you seen the opinion letter? Were there any qualifications or anything there?
No,
No,
it's been clean.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's been,
good.
yeah. It was only in some of the graphs and tables that like are meant to be sort of summary statistics on financials of the school. And I saw this.
Oh, sign it.
Yeah, that's in the appendix. Okay.
Yeah.
Back to you, Alex.
Of course. So just, kind of briefly here, because this was June 30th, and again, this information will come out in the audited financial statements for more review. The final net income was about 1.3. Adjusted for the grants, it was 216,000 compared to the 231, which I would just note is pretty impressive considering we had that enrollment variance all year. So I think that just being $15,000 short or so of our anticipated net income, given the challenges, was just really controlled spending and really strong management, both by the board and the school leadership. So very good on that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the cash flow because this was from June. So I'm just going to hop over to July and just to demonstrate cash did go back up. So at the end of July, we're back up to 74 days cash on hand. And, I don't have anything to report in terms of variances in enrollment. It looks like we will be exceeding our enrollment for the year. So hopefully all of the variances that get reported in the future will be in the positive direction. But because of the grants, we knew what the grants were. We were able to budget those into the financials this year. So we aren't going to see the same kind of manipulation and backing in and backing out as we had to last year. We should just kind of be steady state with the funding this year. And then if we look forward, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. It's the month of July, so there's not much happening. So it's all going to change. But if we do look at the cash flow projections over the next several months, if we're trying to keep 60 days cash on hand based on our budget, that's about $2.2 million. So if I'm looking at projecting forward, assuming no major changes, we should be able to maintain that 60 days without issue. I will prepare that chart of where we have been over the past couple of years so we can kind of see when we dip and when we may need to anticipate making a transfer, but I'll also keep a careful eye on the projected cash flow to make sure that we have sufficient cash balances. So Marianne, as you said, we don't have to do, constant transfers. Any questions on June year end or July?
Well, can you just pull up quickly the number today?
How much cash we have today?
Yeah.
Yeah, give me 1 second. All right, so this isn't including the smaller accounts that we use for like the debit card and HRA. We have 3.3.
Okay.
And that excludes the escrow. So we're good.
Great.
Okay, so I think if no questions, we can move into the next update, which would be DFC. And I think we didn't meet formally as a group. We corresponded via email. There was a call with our landlord and his team earlier this month, just to revisit some of the conversations we've had in the past. I'm now referring to the school year report and some of the miscellaneous updates that were there. So provided to you there. And so we had a nice conversation about, what potential next steps there might be, and talked a bit about expansion, talked a bit about purchase of building, and then decided we kind of come back to this in a week or two, which is about now, once the landlord's team is fully back after some vacation time. So that's where things stand right now. But it was, I think, a productive conversation, and we'll have more to report out on next meeting. Sal, would you add anything to the mix there?
No, I think you nailed it.
Okay. And so I think that's DFC, Jim.
Okay, great. ECPC?
I think we talked a bit about that, what we discussed during that call this evening with the August event, and then some of the ways in which we'd like to have representation at various events over the course of the year, board-wise at family events. So nothing more to bring to the board that should be discussed or engaged in. I don't know, Trudy or Sal, if you add anything there.
Not right now.
No, I think that's about right.
Great, SLC.
Okay, so I think per Madonna and Jeanette's recommendation, we're going to focus on one component of our meeting today, and that's in looking at essentially the predictability of our lead-up exams over the course of the year to our state exams, and we're really focusing on middle school here. And so to what degree are those exams accurately predicting how kids ultimately do at the end of the year? And so that's valuable. And so let me again share my screen. And so, yeah, the framing here is if over the course of the year, as we administer internal assessments and administer STAR, if those exams are giving us some degree of accurate results with regard to how kids might do at the end of the year based on how they do over the course of the year, that positions us then to make good decisions about how to reinforce things so that we're getting the most, or kids are getting the most out of school each year, and that kids are growing at a level that sets them up in middle school to be high school ready as of 9th grade in some of these core skills, mainly reading and math when it comes to STAR, and ELA and math when it comes to IAs. So we've as a general board talked about the degree to which these exams are valuable for those purposes and what they tell us about what kids are learning and what perhaps they're not. And so it's an important discussion to have. And so this is a bit of a deep dive into some of the data that we collected. So let me share that. Let's see. Hit the link. And move on over to correlations. Here we are. So what these two tables give you a sense of is like, let's start at the top, and I'll talk you through just one line as a way of interpreting this. And so essentially, this is reading data, this first table, and there's data by grade, and then for all middle school. And so in the 6th grade, this column here, we have the percentage of students that are predicted to score proficient based on, or the percentage of students who did score or pass their exams at different parts of the year. And so we have STAR Winter, which happens in December, January. And we have the percentage of students who were deemed to score proficient on the state exam as of the winter. Let me back up. In column B, we have the actual results. So this is how kids actually did in June. So 45% of our 6th grade students scored on their state exam in ELA proficiently or above. That compares with STAR winter results of 31%. And then what we do is we just look at the difference there to sort of see what's the spread between what was predicted as of different points in time versus what the actual result was. So we also have STAR spring, which happens in June, and that happens after the state exam. And so at that point in time, 22% of students scored in a manner that STAR deemed proficient or above, versus again, the 45 on the actual exam, the spread being 23. We compared actual results to IA1, which happens in the fall, IA2, and these are internal assessments, exams that we create or have adapted from other sources. And then our IA3, which is a general mock exam. It's a prior exam and we give it. I'll talk a bit more about what happened here in ELA momentarily. The color coding here represents the degree of variation. So the deeper the red, the more the variation, the lighter the red, the more closely the internal exam or lead-up exam aligned with the actual exam. So are there questions on what this data is presenting before we dig into what it shows us? So what you generally see here, I guess we'll talk about the findings in a moment. The same data applies, is also provided math. And so same interpretation, the deeper the red, the greater the variation. And so for us, we were looking to see which exams seem to be, or to what degree do all the exams seem to be predictive, and then which exams seem to be most predictive of actual results. That was one of the key questions we wanted to put forward. And so in looking at this, some findings are that none of the leading exams seem to highly predict actual exam results across the board. There's variation across all of them. And then all of the exams and reading seem to underestimate the actual state exam results. So in other words, in the fall, winter, and spring, when we gave these exams, kids scored more lowly or didn't score as high as what they actually then did on the state exam in ELA and in math in the spring. Our STAR results offered the relatively closest predictor to actual exam results in reading. And our mock results, which are prior exams given over 2 days, we try to simulate the conditions of an actual exam. We would suspect that those would be the most predictive, and they were in math. In ELA, we gave this exam in January. And so in kind of thinking about context here and telling a story as to what the data reveals, during that time, if you remember, we closed down for 2 weeks. COVID was pretty real with the new variant, and that had some impact on sort of testing conditions, our ability to sort of test reliably, and it was hard, especially in ELA. And so those exams, and we reported this out even back in the late winter of last year, that those exams really weren't as reliable, and we knew that was the case, but we sort of see it here also. And so it's helpful to kind of lay this out and get a sense of which exams seem predictive and why, if we think they should be predictive, they weren't. On the math side of things, the mock exam in math was the most predictive of the exams that we gave. And so that feels right, that seems right. And we'd expect that. As I mentioned earlier, all of the lead-up exams underestimated the actual state results. And so I think that's just good to have in mind as we move into this year and think about what the results give us over the course of the year leading up to the actual exam, provide and what they might not provide. So let me stop there, and there may be some other findings that people have. I can go back to this table if there are clarifying questions here, or if perhaps your findings vary from what I've provided.
Well, I guess just looking at reading, it gets less predictive over time, which is the opposite of what you expect to happen, but presumably you can tweak that. I guess the real question is, based on these results, did you intervene, add extra resources to the right people, or are these so far off that, toward the end of the year, were you intervening with people? Did they not give you the right kind of information for the people you had to jump in and help on?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question, Jim. I think So I think to like sort of maybe address your first question on like what you'd expect, which is backward in reading. We talked a bit about why mock exams were not what they perhaps would have been under more steady conditions in January of last year. In math, we gave this exam a bit later after we got through that variant. And so you see the results are a bit more closely predictive of the actual exams we had in math. So that's encouraging, and we'd expect that to be the case in the ELA, again, without Omicron getting in the way. So we would expect that. The question of like, are we intervening in the right way and doing so with full firepower? I think that's the real work. And I think there's probably mixed findings there, depending on what we were. This past year was a tricky year with regard to just the instability of the year, some changes of staffing, excessive absences among staff and students. I mean, there's a lot there. In a steadier year, I think the answer is we do a better job of that. And I imagine that being the case this year, and that was the case back in 2018-19. Melissa, I don't know if you've got any additional insights there. I think Jim's question is right on. What would you add?
Yeah, I'd say I can't remember the order of the questions you asked, Jim, but ELA seems to get less predictive. So one key thing with the STAR reading is it's a reading exam. And then the ELA test is an English language arts exam. So there's a little bit more analysis, longer reading, etc. on the ELA exam. And there's writing as well, which is a skill not being assessed here. So there's like some degree at which we might see across time the STAR exam get a little bit more less predictive of state test performance, because it's testing some different things. And then I would say like that the other question around like, is this because we predicted folks? Yes, like the primary reason we give these exams, like forecasting is nice, but really we're doing it to action plan. So when we see data like this, we're doing some intensive intervention. We are doing small groupings in class based on how kids do. We are doing after school and Saturday interventions. We are doing pep rallies to get students excited about exams. There are concrete things we're using the data you see here, which is why ideally we would see higher scores rather than lower scores on exams. It gets a little complex because we add content. We'll see that when we do more of a high school deep dive. But yeah, yes, we are preparing folks using this data. So it is exciting to see that they weren't exactly predictive and generally were under predicting.
Yeah, is there, just to expand on my second question, is there a way to tell whether, because you can't do a big intervention with every kid, so you got to pick some subset. Is there a way to tell if you picked the right kids? Because you're looking at test scores and making a judgment, and especially IA1 looks like it was pretty off. If you're picking kids at that based on that test, are you picking the right ones given how far off that exam was from reality? And devoting resources to, is there a way to tell, like, okay, here's the kids we really focused on. Did they move up from these prior tests?
Yeah, if I can put a wrinkle on what I think is effectively the same question, if you change the pass rate on any of these exams such that your pass rate is whatever it actually is, 45% or 33 or whatever, do you get the right cohort?
So I think the question is, if we broke this into performance bands, would we see which kids move?
Right.
And I think that the answer to that, there's a twofold answer to that. Jim at first said, like, could we go back and see these kids? And yes, we have record of that in so much as it's useful to teachers. So if we wanted to take one or two of these tests, each teacher completes a data-driven action plan following the test. It says, okay, I saw what happened. I've sat down with a coach. I've thought about it and I've created a plan. Here's how for the next 6 weeks, I'm going to alter my instruction. Here is the groupings of children I'm going to focus on, either children who really seemed to miss the boat or children who are sitting kind of on this bubble. They were nearly successful, but they had some key misunderstandings. And when I look across the whole class, so Jim, you said like you can't intervene with everyone. I think there's a degree to which you can by identifying the most key skills, A, and then B, intentionally grouping in class. So that could even be kids who are like stretching to more like college ready buckets, or 4s and 5s if we're talking APs. We could go back and see those students who were identified for intervention on IA1, were they successful in this exam? So we have that information there. Are we doing the work of like just from a data level, bucketing kids from IA1 and watching their performance spans across IAs the way like STAR naturally does for us? No, because we're creating these internally, and I have like department chairs who are also teachers and who also coach folks uploading all this information. So right now I don't think we have the data capacity to do that sort of bucketing, but it'd be very exciting across time if we did. But if we wanted to do like some dipstick method, that is something that would be available to us, because for every test we give, we have plans that teachers create. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I just worry that, especially in the reading, given that it's testing different things, are the internal tests that you give the kids really predictive of where you need to focus to get to the finish line? You know what I mean? If they're not predictive, then, you know, are they that far off? Maybe they're not. And I'm sure there's some intuition that's developed in the classroom that's probably more valuable from the educator's level than the test, right? In terms of who needs help with what. But it's a shame that, especially on the reading on the ELA, you know, it doesn't feel like, I don't know how strong the information is that you're getting out of these exams.
Yeah.
Well, and note that one of the math IAs was also quite a bit off as well. So although if we go back, I think generally the math ones were better, but IA2 was quite a bit off as well. So yeah, it does cross into both, I think.
Yeah.
I
think, yeah, thanks for that, Jeanette, and Jim, to answer your note here, or maybe just follow up on it. One of the things that I think would be helpful here as a follow-up analysis for us is, so if we think that the IAs, perhaps, if we're questioning their ability to predict well, and this was kind of a year in which there were a lot of other noise, it was just, you know, other variation outside of school going on, what we should do is look at the same level of analysis and differences in 2018-19 leading up to the actual exam then, where COVID and other things were not in effect. And I would expect, I believe, in kind of recalling where we were at in that year, that our exams have continued to get stronger, even with some of these elements. But even in that year, I think there was closer variation, particularly with the mock, than what we saw this past year. So I want to do that. That's not a big lift. I want to do that in just following up on this discussion tonight, and then on some discussions that have led up to tonight's discussion. Does that make sense, Jim?
Yeah.
All right. So just going back to some other next steps, just so that you're fully aware of what we're acting on now. So we've been, so over the summer, we've been kind of, we had a lot of this sort of data already at hand, and even better data than what we presented today with like how kids did on specific standards. And so there was some good work done over the course of the summer in retooling some of our IAs and refining them such that they're ever more closely predictive of giving us the best information we need to then engage with kids at different points in the year, so they're getting as much from their days in ELA and classrooms. So that was happening over the course of summer. There's been some discussion with our math chair and ELA chair, as well as our middle school co-principal teaching and learning, about some of this data. And so For example, even just the recalling of the conditions we were under with the mock exam and reading or ELA this past year was something that came out of that discussion. And there's a follow-up discussion to have with regard to thinking about the different exam results alongside the 2018-19 results that we'll have this month moving into next October's meeting, and then in preparation for our first set of IAs happening in late October. We've thought about maybe thinking about revisiting the timing of exams over the year. Right now, we give our mocks fairly early in the year in January, with the actual exam happening in April or May. And so there's a rather large window of time between those two exams. And there's some material that has not yet been taught for a first time as of January. And so kids are being tested on things that they haven't first learned. There's some trade-offs there with regard to timing and what's been taught. So there's a sweet spot that we should revisit and consider there. It might make sense to extend and not test so early, but maybe even test 3 or 4 weeks later once we've covered most, if not all, material that will be on the state exam. And then finally, there's been some discussions about maybe looking into some outside resources just to get a sense of whether there are other schools or entities that might offer something more in line with more highly predicting end of year exam results. So those are some of the things we're doing now in preparation again for our first IA and in response to this data that we looked at over the past few weeks. Are there any other action steps that folks would want to put on the table as something which could be valuable? All right, so I think with that, that is the deep dive coming from the SLC meeting on Thursday. Jim, I guess we're back to the agenda and approval items.
Yeah, okay. Okay, first item is the minutes from the prior meeting, August 24th. Does anybody have any questions regarding those minutes? Okay, everybody turn on their video. And, okay. Sal, we need video, or do we?
Yeah, to the vote. Yeah, Madonna, if you're on right now, we can get you on video. Do the vote. That'd be great.
I think we've got quorum on video.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, so all in favor of approving the minutes from the prior meeting? Okay, thank you. Next item is opening a bank account. Josh, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So so as you all know, we have been awarded a grant to replace our windows at the high school. And so right now we've been sifting through some of the stipulations of that grant. Marion and Jeanette have been helpful there. And so one of the things that we have to do as a part of this grant in order to receive funding to then pay for the windows is to open up a separate bank account and have funding then held there. In order to then open a bank account, we need the approval of the board.
Okay, sounds simple enough. Any questions?
Yeah, Josh, do you have a separate item for approving entering into the agreement itself, or should
Yeah. Well, I looked at I looked at last month's agenda, and I felt as if one of the items that we voted on was replacement of select windows at 584 Driggs Avenue. So we approved that. So if that's not sufficient, we could put it back up for vote again tonight.
Yeah, given that they wanted opinion from us, I'd rather have an express approval of entering into the agreement.
Okay. So essentially this would be, we again have been provided with the grant. We're working kind of like through the agreement with state now and working through some of these stipulations. This is a grant in which we would be reimbursed. So we would front the funding for the replacement windows, and then after fronting it, would then be reimbursed the funding that it cost to replace the windows. And so that's generally the transaction. I don't know if you'd add anything, Jeanette or Marion or Chris.
No, I think that's basically it. If I remember correctly, this agreement has various procedural requirements, so we just have to be careful that we comply with that.
Right.
Okay, so we're approving both the agreement and the opening of the bank account. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, great. Okay, any questions from anybody else? Okay, all in favor? Thank you.
And Chris, just a note there that that would be an additional item in the agenda that is not listed as explicitly as an approval item. All right, the next item here, yes. So the next item here is about gaining the approval of this board to then submit as a part of our revision request an update on our org chart, where that org chart would provide the senior leadership of the elementary school that we would open if given permission to do so. And so essentially we would move into a co-principal model at our elementary school as we do with our middle school and high school. And that's the change. Right now that isn't represented in the org chart that we provided to state as a part of our revision request. And that was something that Paula brought back to us and said, hey, could you have the board approve this, assuming it's okay? And that will suffice.
Just those two positions.
So the question was around leadership positions at the school within the org chart. And so at this point in time, yes, that would be the org chart we provide with the addition of those two positions.
Okay.
Does that change the budget?
No, reflected in there. No, it's reflected in the budget that we've shared with them. It just is not in the visual org chart itself.
So was this one of the material revisions that Paula flagged that we didn't consider material, but she does, so we have to get separate approval? Is that the driver?
I believe that is the case. I know that this is just an update on the revision. And so I guess overall, the request to expand downward is a material revision. And so this is a component of that. And so getting board approval, I guess, would just be a conservative way of ensuring that there's no sort of like coming back and asking for more kind of approvals later on.
Okay, any other questions for the org chart? Okay, all in favor? And thank you. Okay, and Josh, is this the last thing that they're asking for on our submission, or is there more?
Well,
is there another iteration here?
I think this has been a first time going for Michelle, and she's been surprised by the number of times that there's been an additional request. But again, I think it's been impressive because it just shows that there's some real work going on in helping us put forward a really solid plan.
Okay, good. Okay, great. Next item is the addition of a second bus.
Yeah, Chris, you want to say a few words there? And Jeanette,
Absolutely.
please chime in if you want to add anything.
Absolutely. I appreciate last month when the board approved one Unity school bus for the full year, costing around $99,000. The outpouring of requests from our sixth graders, seventh graders, and eighth graders is a lot more than expected. So we now currently have 2 Unity school bus, full-size buses running every day. There's about 30 students per bus. So we're requesting additional funding for another full school bus for the full school year. We do have a chaperone, adult staff chaperone on the bus as well. We have more students riding the bus than ever before, and a lot of our students are coming from a lot of our feeder schools in Canarsie, East New York, and Brownsville. So students are traveling further to school. We want to make sure they're getting to school safely. So we have another school bus running. So requesting additional funding for that second school bus.
What's the cost?
Same cost as the initial bus. It's going to be over the course of the school year, probably somewhere between 90 and 95,000.
Buses are really expensive this year.
Yeah, and that's the cheapest one. The other quotes I got was that's $550 a day. Other quotes I got were $600 and $700 a day. So that's the cheapest of the quotes I've gotten by far.
And Chris thinks it's a reliable company and all of that.
They are. We've been running for the past since the first day of school. It's been going well so far. So fingers crossed it'll stay like that through the end of the year. And our parents are happy. The school kids are getting to school safely, which they're really happy about. So like with our middle school enrollment higher, kids are getting to school safely. So we're happy.
Okay. Great. Any questions? Okay. All in favor of the second bus? Okay. Thank you. Public comment? Anything? Josh, you want to talk about the next meeting?
Yeah, so I think we will likely have state comparison results. We'll talk a bit about the testing. We'll have STAR baseline results and analysis of that. So we'll talk about what we're seeing there. We'll have a new dashboard up and running. I imagine we'll jump back into enrollment and staffing. And then with state comparison results, we'll be able to maybe talk about targets for this coming year. We've got placeholders for those, but I imagine circling back to finalize them once we have all the information we need to do so.
Will we have any word from our landlord on what they intend to do by then, or what they would like to do?
Yeah, I'm gonna contact them tomorrow, and so I imagine a call with the DFC maybe toward the end of this week or early next week.
Okay.
Josh, can you invite the AFC to that call?
Yeah, I think so. I want to definitely be aware of your time, and I just want to make sure it's like the right moment. Like it's not just like
you know what?
Yeah.
If everybody has 2 minutes, why don't we go to executive? We can just give the high level overview of what's going on there. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. So let's